Welcome to Health System CIO's Partner Perspective interview series. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor-in-chief. Today we're talking with Damon Auer, Chief Executive and Managing Director for North America with Daedalus Group. Damon, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Anthony.
All right, Damon, listen, you've been around a little bit. No offense, not to age you, but
What was it? What gave it away? Was it the gray hair?
listen, if I have a few left on my head, it's so sad, right? But we have to persevere. But you've been around, so let's just give us a little background on you. You got a lot of experience, so just to frame up our conversation, that some of your experiences, let people know.
Sure. I started my career in consulting with Anderson and then Price Waterhouse, and then started a firm with some partners of mine in the late 90s, early 2000s, which we ended up directing towards industry-specific software as we went along. And I had the opportunity to create our healthcare practice at that company, which we subsequently sold. So I've been through some M&A cycles in the healthcare technology space that I think are interesting and kind of inform some of the way I think about what we're doing now and what we might be doing next. Just 2.5 years ago, I had the privilege of taking the helm at Daedalus in North America. Daedalus is one of the biggest healthcare software companies in the world, but is relatively new as of 2.5 years ago to the US market. So we're a pure play healthcare software company. We're huge in Europe. As they say, I forget what movie that's from. It's a late 90s grunge movie, or maybe actually, what was that movie? In any case, so we're looking at the Daedalus software portfolio, which is pretty modern, pretty new, but primarily built in the Eurozone, and identifying software solutions in that portfolio that we think can have an impact on the transforming system here in the US.
All right, good. Well, we're gonna go pretty high level right here, and we're gonna try and help out our readers, the CIOs and such, with some strategy, and maybe even their CEOs. We're gonna talk a little bit about what's going on in the retail and ambulatory space. And the point will be to inform the thinking of folks making strategy at the health systems. Those are our core readers, the folks at the health systems. So what are you seeing in that ambulatory retail space? What are your observations there? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I really got myself involved and educated myself about the healthcare industry going back 2 decades, with a focus on the experience of the customer, the consumer, the patient. And we've done some really interesting things in other industries, and we're doing some really interesting things in healthcare now too, around the experience that our customer, our patient has, or our care team members, to the extent that they're a customer of our IT organization, as an example. And it's been fascinating to watch, particularly over the last 13 years since the Affordable Care Act passed and started or at least put new energy behind the incentive process for having healthcare providers rewarded for worrying about whether or not I'm well, not just when I'm in their office, but wherever I am and whenever. That is the whole accountable care movement that spawned there. And there's some interesting things that are happening both economically and just practically from a care perspective. From an economic perspective, we are shifting steadily more and more and more of the spend for healthcare in the United States from a health plan, insurer, payer, into high deductible consumer health plans. And when you sign up for a high deductible plan, I've been involved in a couple of them over the years, you actually end up paying a lot more of at least your outpatient care directly, which means if you're paying directly, you tend to scrutinize that spend just a little bit more, right? You get
Right.
to make some different choices. And choice all of a sudden becomes a major driver of where the consumer is going to go for outpatient care. That's much less true for inpatient care. Typically, when we need acute care help, we're lucky to be conscious. We had some traumatic event, and we need specialists looking after us and equipment and everything else. So the consumer experience, while it still matters, or the patient experience in that acute setting, matters less because that acute setting is still paid for by our catastrophic insurance. It's kind of like, I think of it, I've described it to my kids at dinner. It's kind of like how we pay for our car insurance, right? I pay for catastrophic car insurance, but I don't pay for insurance that reimburses me for my oil changes or filling the gas tank or rotating the tires or whatever, right? The basic maintenance. And I think that's kind of analogous to the way outpatient services in healthcare, which are every day we have new therapies and procedures that we can do in an outpatient setting that used to require an acute setting, but don't anymore. So that consumerization of the spend and where I'm going to go and what I'm going to spend on and how happy or not, kind of vote with my dollars thing, is forcing some real shifts in that ambulatory care space. And I find that interesting from a technology perspective, because for the last decade, as we've been trying to figure out how to help healthcare provider organizations be effective post Affordable Care Act and the accountable care models and value-based models, we've been trying to tackle that consumer experience in ambulatory and outpatient care as such an important part of a health system's IT strategy and spend in a state. But we're seeing a conscious decoupling. I think Gwyneth Paltrow coined that term.
Conscious decoupling.
A conscious decoupling of ambulatory care, aka outpatient care, from the acute care setting, which creates a whole different set of strategic questions, challenges, and opportunities for large brand name health systems.
So this conscious decoupling, I mean, the implication of calling it conscious is that perhaps the health systems have realized that this is not an area that they're going to win. They're not nimble enough, they're not quick enough, they're not consumer centric enough to be able to play here, and they're going to pull back and redeploy those resources elsewhere. Do you think that is in fact the case, or do you think they're just going to lose, but they're not consciously going to give up this ground?
Yeah, the conscious decoupling thing just sort of makes me laugh a little, because it's a pleasant name for a divorce, right? And, the reality is, I think that this is going to happen to us in health systems, not because of us. And you can see some really obvious sort of high profile examples, like the One Medical service, which is a reimagining of primary care and some other outpatient specialty care around the consumer, the customer, the person who's receiving care. And I live on the north side of Chicago. My family has been subscribing to One Medical, I think, for 2 years now, just because, and we do that out of our own pocket, just as a supplemental to our health insurance, because it's so convenient. It's such a different experience in the One Medical ecosystem than we would have, for example, and I don't want to talk bad about anybody, so maybe I'll just leave out any names. But let's say we have some pediatric care institutions, and I have a kid who turned 18 last year and went off to college, and that transition from pediatric to adult care for my son was one of the most maddening, ministrivia laden experiences I've ever had in my life, or my wife has ever had in her life, or my son has ever had in his life. And it's just, it shouldn't be that way. And where we ended up eventually, after banging our head against the wall with the big health system that was doing the pediatric care for my son, but we couldn't get meds transferred to a new pharmacy and yada, yada, yada. Lots of small, but what felt like small things to accomplish, but turned into big, giant hurdles. I was sitting at my desk here one morning, and my wife called me and she was sobbing. And I'm like, what's going on? What's up? And she had just left an appointment at One Medical with my son where they got everything handled in 14 minutes. So,
She was crying with joy.
with joy. Yeah. She had spent other time,
Oh my God.
frustration or crying out over the 9 months prior to that, where we had literally tried everything we could think of. And I'm in the business.
Right.
Like, so I'm more difficult to confound with those.
That's a great expression right there. More difficult to confound. I like that.
But I was still completely confounded, as was my wife. Like, we just couldn't get it done. And that there's some old, I think, process debt, and there's some old technology debt, and there's just some old practice debt that some of our health systems are saddled with that are just really hard to get to change into a real patient-centric, consumer experience-centric model. And as long as that's true, and as long as we as consumers are starting to pay for more of it directly, I think this shift of ambulatory and outpatient care separating and turning into a real consumer experience focused care enterprise versus our catastrophic acute care, which we will always need and we need to invest in differently than ambulatory. Anyway, I find all that really interesting to observe.
So I was at the Chime conference, and there were a couple of anecdotes I heard from people, CIOs and the like, who talked about their home health programs failing. So they they went down the home health road, home monitoring in the home, all this kind of thing, and essentially the programs failed. Reimbursement issues, they weren't going to get reimbursed for these things. Difficulty supporting the technology in the home, that sort of last mile type thing. If you have any rural situation, poor cellular service, getting out to these places to provide any kind of remedy from an IT point of view, it didn't work. So they kind of shut them down. And that's not too far from retail and everything you're talking about. Does that make sense? It's all part of the same thing?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think it's related. I think we've tried some really interesting things and learned some really interesting lessons about care in different settings and ways that we have to change our technology and our processes and the way our people approach work that is really interesting. So we've been able to be involved in some really interesting care coordination ventures with different health systems over the last 10 years or so. And I've seen some really cool, really amazing new approaches that are informed by non-healthcare industry, real consumer experience focused leadership.
Mm-hmm.
We had an opportunity to work on a project with Dartmouth Hitchcock now this goes back 7 or 8 years. But they had a venture called Imagine Care that they spun up there at Dartmouth that ultimately ended up spinning out a couple of years later. But the whole idea there was to create a really high touch, but highly digitally enabled um, patient post-discharge patient experience support for um, individuals with chronic conditions that needed management over time, hypertension, um, diabetes, others, right? And it was brilliant. And they
Hmm.
brought in um, experienced design leaders from Land Rover and Disney and Starbucks and places like that to um, help strategize on what would in fact create the best experience for the patient, the consumer, over time, and be sustainable and automatable, so that it didn't require hundreds and hundreds of humans to interact. And that was brilliant, but it was before its time. And so much of what we had to create was bespoke, and anything bespoke costs a lot of money.
Hmm.
Um, and Dartmouth Hitchcock, similar to what you just mentioned, the CIO mentioning to you at Chime, funded that for a couple of years and then ran out of resources to put towards it. So spun it out to some investors in Sweden, where it continues, but in a very different health system. So yes, I think that is an example, and I think there's lots of examples that CIOs in big health systems can share with us about initiatives that we've started to either try and put a hospital in the home, um, or just get closer to where our patients live and try and provide them more personalized care experiences in those settings. To take that on as a catastrophic acute care expert organization, to try and take on and sustain that consumer experience driven venture is really hard to sustain. I wish I had more examples of organizations that have sustained it in a meaningful way, but there's few that I've seen.
So we have the acute experience, and then there is the the discharge, right? And health systems are on the hook for readmissions, I think within 30 days, depending on what's going on, things like that. So there is a need to continue care beyond the acute setting, at least in some way for a period of time. Otherwise, they come back from like a boomerang and you don't get paid. So even if we're going to sort of pull back from trying to compete on the absolute retail end, the health systems still have to go a bit beyond, right, the acute realm
Oh yeah,
and leverage
yeah.
technology to do that. So give me your thoughts around sort of if you were drawing a new circle and you were going to put some stuff now on the outside, what would still be on the inside?
Um, well, the acute services that we need a hospital setting to
Hmm.
provide in a um, in a way that we know will lead to the best outcome for the patient have to stay in acute. The post-discharge period of time that we're on the hook, I think that actually becomes in many cases, as health systems find themselves shedding more of that ambulatory and outpatient service. Um, I think that's going to lead to a lot of collaboration with organizations that are looking after consumers of care patients when we're not in acute settings.
Hmm.
So, um, One Medical, and I'm not an expert on One Medical, I'm just a user, but I'm a happy user. My family's happy with the service that we get there. Um, I think One Medical is built to collaborate with acute centers of care that are sort of hospital anchored,
Hmm.
uh, and perhaps be a proxy for coordinating the experience that a person has post discharge. But I'm kind of speculating
So
there.
if you were a CEO of a mid-sized health system, traditional health system today, considering all the things they currently encompass, would you tell me about the strategy you would propose? You would say, okay, here's where we are, here's what we've done. My vision for the future is different. And I'm going to tell you about my vision now. I'm going to tell you where we're going to stop focusing and where we're going to reallocate resources. So, what would that sound like?
So I think we need to be really good at in a health system. We need to be really good at the complex, um, high impact, high acuity care services and be world class at that. And that means a tremendous focus on our team members that are delivering the care team members. It means a tremendous focus on getting the most utility out of the assets that we can deploy in those environments, human assets, equipment, space, technique, and really be laser focused on optimizing medical outcomes in that environment, which is a very different focus than focusing on the consumer experience of care, 95% of which lies outside of acute settings. So am I going to be able to enable a team efficiently that can do both of those things
Hmm.
in a world-class way? I think probably not. There will be some organizations that manage to, I think, pull that off and have a geographic footprint and brand that is consumer friendly enough that you can probably do that. But that I think will be the exception, not the rule. So for a typical mid-sized health system, I would say focus on being world class in the acute setting and partner for what you need from the ambulatory and non-acute.
All right, very good. So if that was the mandate, let's say you did that, you spoke to your board and you spoke to your executive, you said, here's our new true north, and here's what we're going to be. We're going to give up certain sort of areas that we were trying to play because I don't think we can win. Um, Talk about the IT strategy that would underlay the new vision of focusing on acute. What are some of the technologies? What are some of the areas? Where would you have your CIO focus to support this new business model?
Yeah, good question. So I think the good news is a lot of the investment, time, energy, money that we have put into the digital plumbing of our electronic medical record systems, and getting those into a as usable and efficiently usable a state as we can, is directly, those are great investments for a future like we've just talked about. So the EMR, standardizing that EMR and continuing to drive efficiencies into its use. There's all sorts of really promising, exciting, intriguing AI-enabled use cases now to take work out or make work more efficient for scarce human resources in those environments. And we know that our technical resources are going to continue via Moore's law to be more and more accessible and have a bigger impact on that efficiency over time. So get the EMR right and continue and in a continuous improvement program around its use. The other thing that one of the solutions that we are seeing some real interesting demand signals for in the Daedalus portfolio is our command center solution, which is a pre-curated set of KPIs for driving efficiency and effectiveness into a big acute setting.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of what we're finding more and more, and I was at the Reuters Health Conference last week for a couple of days, and the topic of the data estate and how quickly it's growing is is a commonality, but also what do we do once we've got our data wrangled into one place? That opens up a world of possibility in terms of what we can do for good with that data. The problem with the world of possibility is that it's really hard to get from pile of data to insight and impact without going through dozens and dozens and dozens of iterations, which consumes time, scarce resources, that change management cycle, really, to get to actionable insight. So a command center solution has already pre-curated the KPIs that come out the other side of that process that we know are high value for the C-suite, to see what's going on in the enterprise and make changes, and can just shorten the time, effort, money, investment requirement to get from I've got my data to now I've got insights for my executive team that we can take actions on, or even my frontline operational team members take action on. So that's an EMR estate in order, data wrangled, and then some mechanism for surfacing insight out of that pile of data that's growing exponentially.
The vision you talked about, and we talked about the CEO driving the vision. They're the one that's going to present the vision. The CIO is supposed to support it. So if you're working for a CEO that is still believes that they can own retail, ambulatory, I don't know, what do you do as a CIO? You just have to keep supporting your boss's vision,
Well, I mean,
right?
you got to be serious about it, right? Because it is a very different venture
Yeah.
to own that ambulatory consumer experience driven space
Mm-hmm.
than it is to own the catastrophic care space. So you got to put your resources where your vision and your mouth is on that one. Good local example from about a year ago is that Northwestern Medicine here in the Chicagoland area bought the Hyatt Regency downtown Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Why in the world would they do that? Right? What are they? They're not in the hotel business.
Right.
The whole strategy there is to create a different consumer experience at some of Northwestern's facilities down in the loop. Kids were born in that hospital. And so they're doubling down on investing in the amenities for a world-class consumer experience, not just the care and the care team members, but the other things that go around it. I need a place to stay, I need food to eat, and so on. So that's one, I think, practical example. You have to be serious about committing to that patient and consumer experience.
So are you saying by buying the hotel, they are embracing the ambulatory retail, or
Well, they're creating a place for family members and patients and direct patients to stay near Northwestern facilities while they are getting care. So they're including hoteling into their processes.
But
right?
that could, I'm still not clear on whether, because you could be totally saying we're just going to focus on acute, and you could buy that hotel to support, or I'm not sure, if you're saying that goes more towards an acute strategy or an ambulatory strategy or retaining it, because it could go either way to me.
I think it's a consumer experience strategy, which is absolutely necessary for ambulatory space. Can be a differentiator for the acute and catastrophic as well, potentially, but is definitely a consumer experience focused move and investment.
Yeah, I heard somebody say recently that they surveyed, I guess it was in an acute setting, and they surveyed patients or family members, what do you want to see? And most people, number one thing was parking. And I swear to you, when my father was in the hospital when he was alive, and he was in there for a while, and it was like $8 a day to park. And it's like that's not inconsequential if you're going to see a family member every day.
Yeah.
So, there's some things that have nothing to do with IT that can really help
Oh,
that
right.
experience,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Lots of things. Lots of
Yeah.
things.
So you said there may be some winners in this space if the people who the entities that want to retain, keep fighting in ambulatory and retail. There'll be a few winners, maybe the bigger ones, but you don't see a lot of them winning. You think in general it's a better strategy to relinquish that space. You're not gonna be able to outdo the convenience that these other folks can offer.
I think there's some partnership and joint venture opportunities in that space, um, that I definitely encourage health systems to keep in view,
Mm-hmm.
um, as opposed to just packing up and walking away. The but it is we do need to recognize how very different practically, economically, and from an experience standpoint that care delivery is than the care that we orchestrate and deliver in an acute setting.
I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, there's anybody who's had any experience with it now. I have a physician that I see, and I see him for the blood pressure, the cholesterol, and that kind of stuff. But I don't want to go near his place if I don't have to. Anything else, I don't want to go near. It's far. They take forever. You see like six people before you see him. He's like, you see, it's unbelievable how long you're there. It's a horrible, horrible experience from your time point. And then you go to one of these urgent care centers. You book it online. You're in and out in 15 minutes. You have your script. You're done. Boom, boom, boom.
Yep.
It's so it's a completely different culture. The other one's the old school culture of the doctor is like way up on high, and you will wait, and he will see you when he's ready, and it's just a completely different experience. To your point,
Yeah. Eric Tobel caught it in the title of his book 10 years ago, I think now, 9 years. Um, the patient will see you now,
yeah,
right? the,
it's
the shift in the consumerization is care. I mean, we can't, it's a good shift
yeah,
from a human perspective, right? It's good. I don't want my kids to have that same experience, convoluted,
oh,
and oftentimes feels like it's intentionally confounding experience of care, and they won't have to because
right,
we are consumerizing that part of care, and we will keep our world-class catastrophic care focus where it needs to be,
right,
right?
because that's when I don't mind when you treat me like that. When my life's on the line, treat me
I'm
like
lucky to
that.
be conscious. Yeah, do what you need to do.
What you need
You
to
make
do.
me, make
I
me better.
will worship the ground you walk on. But if I need a couple drops for pink eye, like don't take half a day, right,
Right.
of my time.
Yep.
So no, it's a great point. You mentioned before the product you guys have with the dashboard and the KPIs. It's almost like it sounds like a plug and play, save you a lot of time, get you good reports and things like that. Um, let's talk a little bit more about sort of that dynamic in health systems. People want actionable intelligence. They want information. They want to be more efficient, whether that's reports or whatnot. A lot of times that can be really challenging when we want to bring together data from different applications, right? If I had some of this over here and this over here, and I could bring it, I get this report, and that would really help me because I'd have insight into my business. I mean, this is a huge dynamic probably in all businesses, but also in healthcare. We've got all the data, but it's all over the place. But if I could just see these different things this way, it would really help me. So, talk about people trying to move in that direction.
Yeah, I think I mean one statistic that I heard at the Reuters event last week, and I think it's been around for a little while, but it said that the average size health system, and I'm not sure exactly what average size is
Right.
defined as, that's a median or a mean or what, but has 50 petabytes of data,
Hmm.
and it's growing exponentially. Like that is a ton of data, and trying to find the insights that are valuable in that could be a full-time job for hundreds of data scientists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to use emerging AI capabilities, and we have to use KPIs that we know matter
Mm-hmm.
and APIs to those KPIs,
Yeah,
that,
nice.
right? Um, that can get us to insight quicker. And so what we're finding more and more is that good sized health systems, anyway, some of the bigger ones, have spent lots of time and energy and resources to get data from a lot of different places into a place and make it available for use.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That took a lot of work. But now that it's available for use, what do you use it for?
Mm-hmm.
Is the question. And it kind of reminds me when we were implementing some early analytics stuff in the late 90s as consultants. We had to take a very different approach to implementing an analytics solution than we did to implementing an ERP solution or an electronic medical record solution, or a CRM solution, because those are all different systems that automate processes. But an analytics solution is intended to answer questions. And if you can't anticipate what the questions are going to be 2 years from now, because you haven't gone through that cycle, that learning cycle with another organization or organizations, which we have had the benefit of doing at scale with thousands of healthcare provider organizations around the world, then you're starting from an empty whiteboard, and that sucks. It's great creatively, but it sucks productively,
Yeah.
because not taking best advantage of the KPI definition that has already occurred by those who have been on the journey ahead of you. So I think that a command center view of what is happening in your healthcare enterprise can have tremendous value in shortening that cycle from we got our data in a usable state to making good, valuable, impactful use of that data, by putting the KPI framework on big giant wall-sized screens that you can't not see.
Mm-hmm.
And once you see it, it becomes actionable. So I think that's one of the most encouraging ones. I'm as excited and intrigued about AI use cases, generative AI use cases in particular, now to surface insights that may be hidden in masses of data, but it's still early days. We're doing a lot of experimenting with those generative AI models to see what insights are surfaced, and if they're really good, they become part of our KPI library, right? So it's another way to accelerate the space and time between having your data in order and having it in a insightful, usable, impactful place.
Damon, we're almost out of time. I just want to give you an opportunity for a final piece of advice. We talked about where you think things are going, um, which, for a lot of health systems may, especially the CIOs, may not be quite the marching orders that they're getting at the current time. It may be the direction things are going, but I'm not sure how many CEOs out there have reached the conclusions you have and are ready to put that into practice. It's a bold move, and if it's right, it certainly um, will be very beneficial for them. But a lot of CIOs are not going to have had those marching orders. They're still going to be under the current regime of, you know, we want to play everywhere, perhaps. Your best piece of advice for those out there in the trenches today.
Well, I think the change is coming faster than any of us predict. I think there's a great, I think it's a Bill Gates quote, where we as humans, we tend to over estimate the pace of change in the next year and dramatically underestimate the pace of change over a decade. So these feel like tectonic forces that are not I don't think we're gonna go backwards on the consumer experience thing. I don't think we're all of a sudden healthcare is gonna get tons cheaper in the United States. I think it's going to continue to, we're going to find efficiencies in technology that we haven't even thought of yet, obviously. But changes that shift to the consumerization, particularly of the ambulatory and outpatient care experience, is I think unstoppable. So you got to decide where you want to be in that ecosystem. The really good news is, if you are a health system executive with a substantial ambulatory care business today, that ambulatory care business is worth a lot of money to organizations that intend to facilitate this conscious decoupling. Amazon, I think, paid 4 times trailing 12 revenue for One Medical. 4 times revenue. One Medical wasn't making any money. So that's not the multiples that are getting contemplated on these deals to really put capital behind the shift are substantial enough to get any boardroom's attention in a health system. For now, tomorrow, not 2 years from now, but tomorrow, I think we have to continue to invest and find efficiencies in the electronic medical record. We have to continue to aggregate data from all the different places that it exists in our organization and begin to incorporate information that exists outside our organization, but can help with our thinking and insight coming out of that data. The panel that I had an opportunity to participate in with you a couple months back had some great CIO participants on it. Every one of them mentioned the fact that there remain hundreds of systems that have pieces of information in them in these large health system organizations. So it's not enough to just get the EMR right. You absolutely have to do that and standardize it and create a continuous improvement process around it. But you also have to recognize that there's a lot of information about the people that you serve and the people who serve the patients, and how you can help them in lots of different places in the org. So those who have not done the hard work of getting that data connected and put into a usable place have to do that. And then the third step, I think, is creating real meaningful insight out of that data. So get the plumbing stabilized and continuously improving. Orchestrate your data estate intentionally, and then make smart investments to accelerate the distance from data estate to insight.
That's great stuff, Damon. Bold predictions. I love it. We love that here. So thank you for your insights. I really appreciate it. I think people are going to enjoy it. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Anthony. It's fun.